I'm going to do a quick charting example here. My goal is to show that you do not need to run a server in order to be able to bring in some JSON data into your HTML file where you might be visualizing this using some charting library. So I'm going to go ahead and show you here the very first example I have. As you can see, this is the example that I showed in class. I have a placeholder here on line 2 for the chart. I then bring in the library on line 5. Then I get a handle of that element, the element that is on line 2. I grab it on line 8. And the rest of this is boilerplate. That is the structure that the charting library expects. And you can see here a couple of important fields. One of them is the labels, and the other one is the data that is going to go onto the chart, onto the page. And now I'm going to go ahead and drag that file onto the browser. And as you can see there, it displays automatically. We have everything self-contained in one file. And so that's a pretty simple example, pretty straightforward. That is, it's all self-contained. But what if you got the data that you need to chart in another file, let's say a JSON file? Well, one of the things that you can do is that JSON is a valid JavaScript object. And so if you wanted to take all of that data and simply assign it to a variable in a JavaScript file, you can do that. And so let me show you here an example of doing precisely that. Imagine you have all of this data here, this array of data, right? And you have it in a JSON file, and you want to assign it onto a JavaScript variable so you can use it within the rest of your code. And as you can see there, I have done precisely that. I have assigned all of this data here, which is the data that was used for charting. And in this case, I have prefixed each of those values with an attribute. So I have label red and label blue and so on, and I have the values as well. And so this is the additional JavaScript file that I'm then going to bring into the HTML file. So let's go ahead and see that. So as you can see here, I've opened up that second file. This is just ChartJS_02 after the other example. And I have simply here the placeholder, which is on line 2. And then I have the library that I am importing, right? So at this point, what we'd want to do is we want to bring in that additional file that holds our data, our JavaScript variable. And I'm calling it the same name, but I'm giving it the JavaScript extension. And once you reference that, you're not going to be challenged for permissions. You're simply going to be able to pull all of that information in. And from that point forward, that data variable is in scope. And so I'm going to go ahead here to the part that will work with that data. The very first line there on line 9, simply getting a handle of the element on the page, which is line 2 from line 2. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is I'm going to create a couple of variables, one for labels and one for values. And into those arrays, I'm going to populate them with the data that I bring in from the outside, that data variable. So I'm going to loop and assign those values. So as you can see there, that's what that line, that next block of code is. I'm doing data that for each, grabbing each of those items. And from those items, I am taking the label or the value, and then I'm pushing it into the array. So now the last part of it is just the boilerplate, the structure that the library is holding, except we will assign the labels and values, right, that we have defined and that we have populated. So I'm going to go ahead and show you that next. And as you can see here, I have labels, and this is just the language itself. JavaScript can tell these apart. And then we have data and values. So this is a quick look at how to incorporate some data without having to run a server. I'm going to go ahead and save this file, and then I'm going to go ahead and load it into the browser. And so I'm going to go ahead and pull that in now. This is my chart, as you can see there, JS_02. And once I do, we get the same thing as we did before. So that, again, was just a quick walkthrough on how to add data.